I don't know if my tears are from the pain in my body or the pain in my heart, but I can barely keep them back as I sit here and tell you what happened to me, what my own flesh and blood did to me after I trusted him more than anyone else in this world. And before I begin, I want to ask you, please, if you are watching this, subscribe to my channel, like this video, and leave a comment, because I want the world to know what happens when a mother gives everything and in return receives betrayal that cuts deeper than any wound. Because maybe my story will save another woman like me from the same heartbreak. So please stay with me to the end. I'd been in the hospital for 21 long days, fighting an infection after a hip replacement. 21 days of tubes, bitter medicine, and sleepless nights, where I prayed I would have the strength to walk again and return to the only place that had ever given me peace. My little 2-story colonial house in Hartford, Connecticut, the one my husband John and I had spent 30 years repairing, painting, and filling with love. But when the taxi pulled up that afternoon and I stepped out slowly with my cane, I felt something was wrong. The curtains were different, the flower pots were gone, and instead of the welcome I expected, my son David stood at the doorway with a face that was like stone. No smile, no joy at seeing me alive after almost dying in a hospital bed, only a coldness I didn't recognize. And when I tried to push past him, he didn't move. He blocked me, my own boy who I had rocked to sleep and fed with my own hands. And behind him, I saw shadows moving. His wife Clara wearing a silk blouse that wasn't hers, and her parents lounging on my sofa as if they owned it. And I swear my heart stopped beating for a moment, because it felt like I was the stranger, the intruder in my own home. I asked him, my voice trembling, "David, what is going on? Why are Clara's parents here?" And he said words that shattered me into pieces. "Mom, things changed while you were in the hospital. The house isn't yours anymore. You need to find somewhere else to live." And I laughed at first, a broken, desperate laugh. Because how could that be true? I never signed anything. I never agreed to anything. But then Clara stepped forward, her lips painted red, and I saw dangling from her ears the pearl earrings John had given me for our 25th anniversary. Earrings I had kept in a velvet box and treasured more than gold. And she smiled at me with that poisonous sweetness, saying, "Don't worry, Margaret, we've packed your things. They're in boxes in the garage. We'll send them wherever you're staying." As if I were some unwanted tenant they were evicting, not the woman who built this home brick by brick with her husband. Her parents, Robert and Elaine Turner, nodded with mock sympathy, Robert adjusting his tie like some smug banker, and Elaine glancing around with approval at the house she had once mocked as too quaint for her daughter. And when I protested, when I demanded to see the paperwork, David's voice cut through me like a knife. "You signed over power of attorney, Mom, before your surgery. You gave me control. It's legal." And my knees nearly buckled because, yes, I remembered, the night before my operation, terrified of what could happen. My son had slid papers in front of me, told me it was for medical consent, told me not to worry, and I had trusted him like I had trusted no one else. I signed without, reading because he was my son, and now that blind trust was the weapon he used against me. And as I clutched my cane to keep from falling, I stared at him, at the boy I had raised alone after John died, the boy I had worked double shifts as a nurse for so he could go to college debt-free, the boy whose rent I paid when he couldn't afford his first apartment, and I couldn't recognize him anymore. It was like some stranger had taken his face. And when I whispered, "You tricked me," he didn't flinch. He only said coldly, "It's what's best for everyone. You can't manage this house anymore. You'll thank me later." And I felt something inside me die in that moment, not just because of the house, not just because of the lies, but because I realized I had lost my son long before that day. I just hadn't seen it. I tried to push inside anyway. I wanted to touch my furniture, my photographs, my kitchen, but Clara placed her manicured hand on the door and shook her head. "Don't embarrass yourself, Margaret. It's over." And David nodded along with her like some obedient partner, not my child, and I whispered, "This is illegal, and you know it." But he didn't care. He just said, "It's final, don't come back." And as the taxi driver looked at me with pity, I picked up my small suitcase, turned my back on the house I had poured my soul into, and walked away. But before I left, I turned back once, and with a calmness I didn't know I had, I said to them, "Enjoy it. Enjoy it all." And though tears burned my cheeks, my voice didn't tremble, because in that moment I made a silent vow that they had not broken me. They had only awakened a strength in me that they never imagined I had. And as I got back into the taxi, clutching the papers from the hospital in my coat pocket, I took out my phone and sent one short text to my oldest friend, Caroline Miller, the woman who had been my rock since nursing school and who had become one of the best elder rights attorneys in Boston. "Plan B now?" the driver asked softly. "Ma'am, where to?" And though I didn't know the answer yet, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was not finished, not by a long shot, and while my son thought he had stolen my home and my dignity, he was about to learn that a mother's quiet strength, once awakened, can shake the very ground beneath the betrayer's feet. The cab dropped me at a small roadside inn outside of Hartford, nothing fancy. Just a dimly lit room with creaky floors, floral curtains that smelled of old perfume, and a bed that felt too stiff for my still healing hip. But it was shelter. It was a place to sit and breathe, though every breath felt like swallowing glass as the weight of betrayal pressed heavier than the bandages still clinging to my scar. I dialed Caroline right away, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone, and when she answered with her firm, no-nonsense voice, "Maggie, what's wrong?" The tears I'd been holding back broke loose, streaming down my cheeks, as I stammered out the whole ugly story of David, of Clara, of the Turners sitting smugly in my living room like kings of the castle, and she didn't even let me finish before she cut in with fury I hadn't heard in years. "Those parasites have no idea who they're messing with. You listen to me, Margaret. You don't cry, you don't crumble, you hold on because we're going to burn their whole scheme to the ground. I promise you that." And her words, sharp and sure, steadied me enough to breathe again. She told me to stay put, that she would drive up from Boston immediately, and within 3 hours she was at my door, storming into that dingy inn-room in her navy pantsuit, silver hair in a tight bun, looking like a general ready for war. And when she saw the state I was in, hunched on the bed clutching the cane, her tough exterior cracked for just a second as she wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry, but we're going to fix this," before she pulled away and snapped open her leather briefcase like a weapon. She spread documents across the tiny desk, bank statements, property deeds, copies of legal forms she had warned me to keep safe years ago, and when I showed her the text David had sent me from the hospital, a reminder to sign the stack of papers he claimed were just medical authorizations, her eyes darkened with the kind of rage only an attorney with a personal stake can carry. "He slipped a broad power of attorney into your consent forms, Maggie, and I'll bet my license he knew exactly what he was doing, and Claire and her parents egged him on every step of the way." And hearing her put it into words made me shake, with anger, because it wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated exploitation, plotted out while I was weak and terrified of surgery. And I thought of how David had looked at me that night, all gentle concern. "Don't worry, Mom, I'll handle everything," and I wanted to scream until the walls cracked because I realized now every word was poison. Caroline paced the room, firing off instructions. "Freeze your accounts, change your passwords, call your pension office first thing tomorrow, let me handle the house." But when she finally sat down, she grew quiet, staring at me with something softer than rage. "Maggie, I need to ask you, are you prepared for the truth about your son? Because once we pull on this thread, we might find more than you're ready to see." And I whispered back through fresh tears, "I don't think I'll ever be ready, but I need to know. I need to understand how the boy I raised became this man." And she nodded, pulling her laptop closer. She showed me property records, transactions in my neighborhood, names I recognized, the Johnsons down the street, the elderly couple who had just moved suddenly last month. And my stomach twisted as she revealed that Clara's father, Robert, had purchased their home under an LLC just weeks ago, and 2 more properties on the same block. "They're not just after your house, Maggie. They're trying to corner the whole street for rezoning. This is a multi-million-dollar play, and your son is right in the middle of it." And when I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to calm the panic, the realization hit like ice water. They hadn't just stolen from me, they were building an empire on the bones of their own family and neighbors, people who had trusted me, who had brought me casseroles when John passed, who waved to me every morning as I pruned my roses, and now I was part of their destruction. Caroline's phone buzzed and she glanced down, her mouth tightening. "It's worse than I thought, Maggie. One of my contacts at the county clerk's office just sent me a flag notice. There were withdrawal requests from your investment accounts last week. Large sums, approved with digital signatures under your name, but you were lying in a hospital bed." And when she slid the printout toward me, my eyes blurred with tears as I saw 5 transfers totaling over $180,000, drained straight into accounts I didn't recognize, accounts Clara or her father had set up, no doubt, and my grief turned into something harder, colder, like a steel rod sliding into place inside me, because I realized this was no longer just about a house. This was war, and I whispered hoarsely, "They think I'm weak. They think I'm finished. But they don't know me, Caroline. They don't know what I'm capable of when someone threatens everything I built." And Caroline squeezed my hand tight, her eyes blazing with the same, "Fire. Good. Hold on to that, because we're going to make them regret the day they thought they could cross you." That night in the motel room, I didn't sleep, not a single wink. I sat upright in the stiff wooden chair staring out at the parking lot, while the neon vacancy sign flickered against the window like a warning, my heart thudding with every passing car because I kept thinking, what if they're watching me? What if they come here to finish what they started? Because if my own son could throw me out of my house while I was still limping from surgery, what else could he be capable of? And the thought burned like acid in my chest. Caroline snored lightly on the other bed, having finally insisted I tried to close my eyes. But I couldn't, because every time I did, I saw David's face at the door, blank and cold, telling me I no longer belonged in my own home. And that memory stabbed deeper than any scalpel had during my operation. So when the first streak of dawn lit the horizon, I poured myself into the tiny bathroom and splashed cold water on my swollen face. And staring into that cracked mirror, I whispered, "You will not let them win, Margaret. You are not a victim. You are a fighter." And I meant it with every fiber left in me. Later that morning, Caroline drove us to a branch office of my bank, one I had avoided for years because it was across town, and we sat down with a manager who knew me from the days when John and I were saving for David's college tuition. A kind man named Mr. Harris, and when I told him through trembling lips that someone had used my power of attorney to drain my investments, his face turned hard. He pulled up the digital records, and when I saw the electronic signature supposedly bearing my name, I almost collapsed. Because it was so crudely forged, it looked like a child had scribbled it. And I wanted to scream at the betrayal, scream at the audacity, scream that my son thought I was too old, too frail, too blind to notice what he had done. Mr. Harris printed everything, signed affidavits confirming the dates I had been hospitalized, and told me his fraud division would cooperate fully. But the moment we stepped outside into the morning sun, Caroline turned to me with a grim look. "Maggie, these people are not amateurs. They've been running scams for years. You don't just fall into this kind of fraud. Your son has been walking this path for a while. And the only reason he had access to you is because you trusted him more than anyone." And her words tore me open, because she was right. I had ignored the signs, the late-night calls from creditors when he was younger, the sudden business ventures he couldn't explain, the way Clara seemed to know more about my retirement accounts than I did, and I had brushed it all aside with a mother's excuse. He'll figure it out, he's under pressure, he'll come around. But now I saw the truth. He had been practicing betrayal in small doses for years, and I had been too blinded by love to see the storm forming. Later, back at the motel, Caroline's phone buzzed again and she muttered a curse. "It's worse, Maggie. The Turners are filing a motion with the Zoning Commission. They've already got petitions for rezoning your block to mixed commercial use, and your house is listed as their headquarters address." And I felt bile rise in my throat, because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my neighbors. Mrs. Cooper across the street, who had baked cookies with me every Christmas. The Martinez family, who helped John with the roof one summer. People who had trusted me as part of their community. And now, they were targets. In the crosshairs of a fraud machine that used my name, my house, my son to grease its wheels. I sat on the bed clutching my cane, staring at the ugly floral carpet until my vision blurred. And finally, I said the words I hadn't wanted to face. "Caroline, if David is really part of this, If he is not just being manipulated, but is choosing this, then I can't protect him anymore. I can't shield him like I always have. I can't be his mother in this fight. I have to be my own protector. And though the words broke something inside me, they also planted something new. Something sharp and steady, because for the first time in my 71 years, I realized that loving my son did not mean letting him destroy me. And Caroline reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes softer now. Good, Maggie. That's what I needed to hear, because if we're going to take them down, you'll need to be stronger than you've ever been. And I'll be right beside you every step. And in that moment, as I finally let the tears fall without shame, I swore silently that David, my boy who once held my hand on his first day of school, would soon see exactly what kind of mother he had underestimated, and that every lie, every stolen dollar, every cruel word at my doorstep would be the rope he had tied around his own neck. By the third day in that motel room, I felt like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The kind where everything familiar is twisted into something grotesque, where the people you love wear masks of strangers. And as I sipped bitter motel coffee from a paper cup staring at the peeling wallpaper, I realized I had two choices. Either crumble completely under the weight of what my son had done, or gather every ounce of strength left in my body and fight back. And God, help me, I chose to fight. Caroline arrived from an early meeting with her contacts at the county clerk's office carrying a thick folder, her lips pressed into a line that told me whatever was inside wasn't going to be good. She dropped it on the table and spread the papers like a blackjack dealer. Property transfers, zoning applications, LLC registrations, all tied back to Robert Turner's investment group, and every single one of them had my son David's name on them, either as a witness, a co-signer, or the power of attorney. Hold her for me, and my heart twisted as I traced my boy's signature with my finger, the same looping D I had admired on his third-grade cursive homework, now scrawled on documents that stole not just my home but my neighbor's as well. Caroline's voice cut through my fog. They're buying up the block, Maggie, piece by piece. Your hospitalization gave them the window to move fast, and your son has been their golden ticket, using your financial reputation to open doors that would have been slammed shut on them otherwise. And her words landed like hammer blows, each one shattering another piece of the illusions I had clung to about David, because deep down I still wanted to believe he had been pressured, tricked, forced by Clara and her scheming parents. But the evidence on the table didn't lie. He had chosen this. He had aligned himself with them, and he had signed his name over and over again without hesitation. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed, not the delicate tears I had tried to hold back before, but deep, guttural sobs that shook my entire frame. And when Caroline tried to comfort me, I shook my head violently. No, don't try. To make this easier, he knew what he was doing. My son knew. And saying it aloud, hearing my own voice admit the truth, was like ripping open an old wound and watching the blood pour out. But it was also clarifying, like ripping off a blindfold. After stumbling in the dark for too long, after I calmed enough to breathe, Caroline leaned in close and said, Maggie, listen to me. We can win this, but we have to be strategic. We need to let them think you're broken, invisible, irrelevant, because the moment they believe you're no threat is the moment you'll have the power to strike. And though the thought of hiding felt humiliating, something inside me recognized the wisdom. Because they already saw me as nothing more than an old woman with a cane and no fight left. And if that perception bought me time to gather evidence, to build my case, then so be it. That afternoon we drove past my house that now looked like a stranger's, with Clara's mother's gaudy curtains hanging in the windows, and Robert's shiny black SUV parked in the driveway. And as I sat low in the car, watching from behind the tinted glass, I saw David step out onto the porch in his suit, checking his phone, looking for all the world like a respectable businessman, and my chest ached with memories of him as a little boy running barefoot across that same porch, chasing fireflies in the summer dusk, laughing with pure innocence, and I wanted to scream at him, to beg him to remember who he was. But instead I stayed quiet, because Caroline's hand on my arm reminded me that silence was my weapon now. And then I noticed something that made my stomach clench. He handed Robert a folder. Robert flipped it open, scanned it, and then patted David on the back like a proud mentor. And in that small gesture, I saw the truth I had been refusing to see. My son wasn't just being manipulated, he was learning from them, apprenticing under them, absorbing their ruthlessness as if it were gospel. And in that moment, something inside me hardened into steel. Because if David was willing to stand against me, then I would have to stand against him, not just as his mother, but as the only person strong enough to stop him before he destroyed more lives. When we pulled away, I wiped my eyes and told Carolyn in a voice that no longer trembled, "We're going to build a case so strong they'll never recover. Not David, not Clara, not her snake of a father, no one. And when the time comes, I'll look my son in the eye and let him see exactly what he threw away." And Caroline squeezed my hand and said, "Good, because once we start pulling at their threads, this whole tapestry of lies is going to unravel faster than they can imagine. And you, Maggie, are going to be the one holding the scissors." The next phase began quietly, almost invisibly, because Caroline was right. I had to let them think I was beaten, a pitiful old woman shuffling from one motel to another, clutching her cane with no fight left in her bones, but inside I was sharpening every wound into a weapon, and the first thing we did was set up a safe apartment on the edge of Hartford under Caroline's colleague's name. A tiny one-bedroom with peeling paint and a rattling AC unit, but it gave us privacy. And from that kitchen table with its wobbly leg, we began building what Caroline called the war chest, a thick binder where every forgery, every false transaction, every whisper of their scheme was documented. And as I flipped through page after page of my son's signature on documents that gutted me financially, I felt myself transform from a grieving mother into something harder, a woman with purpose. Because if my son thought I would roll over, he had forgotten who raised him. He had forgotten the nights I worked 16 hours straight as a nurse just to pay his tuition. He had forgotten that his mother once held the power to save lives in her hands. And now, I would use that same tenacity to dismantle the life he thought he'd stolen from me. Carolyn coached me on how to bait them without giving away my hand, so I sent David a message one morning, short and simple. "I'm safe, don't worry." And within minutes, he replied, "Mom, I need the passwords to your accounts to make. Sure bills are covered." And though my fingers shook, I ignored it. And his silence afterward told me I had struck the first crack in his confidence. Because for the first time, he didn't know where I was or what I knew. And that uncertainty was my shield. But watching him from afar tore at me too, because a part of me still wanted to believe he could be saved. Yet every new piece of evidence made that hope dimmer. Like the afternoon Caroline's investigator slid a flash drive across the table, showing surveillance photos of David walking into a bank in downtown Hartford with Robert Turner, carrying my deed folder under his arm. And the timestamp on the footage matched the exact hours I was sedated in the ICU. And when I saw that, I clutched my chest, gasping, because it wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was proof, living proof, that my son had chosen their side, that while I was lying in a hospital bed fighting to live, he was carrying away pieces of the life I had built. That night, I made a choice that still haunts me. I called an old colleague, Mr. Douglas, from my hospital days, a man who had gone on to work in compliance for the state's financial crimes division, and through tears, I told him everything. Every betrayal, every dollar stolen, every forged signature. And when I finished, there was a long silence before he said, "Maggie, what they've done isn't just elder abuse, it's organized fraud. And if the zoning manipulation is involved, it could be racketeering, you're looking at federal charges." And I almost dropped the phone, because I hadn't thought beyond the personal pain. I hadn't realized my son's choices had dragged me into the territory of criminal syndicates. But Douglas promised me one thing. If I could get hard evidence of their conversations, their intent, not just paper trails, the authorities would act. So Caroline and I devised a plan that made my heart race like I was 30 again, not 71. We dug out an old phone of hers and loaded it with a discreet recording app. And the following week, when Clara's parents held one of their loud planning sessions in the living room, I crept along the hedges of my backyard, slipping through the gate I had once used to sneak vegetables to my neighbor's children. And with my hands trembling so badly I thought I might faint, I slid that phone under the porch steps through a gap where the wood had splintered, and then I sat in the shadows, clutching my cane for balance, listening through the floorboards. As Robert's deep voice boomed, "Once we finalize the Henderson sale, the commission won't have a choice but to rezone. We'll triple our return." And Clara's voice, sharp and eager, followed. "And once Mom's old place is officially in our name, we can leverage it to fund the next purchase." And then I heard David, my own son, saying words that made my soul shrivel. "Don't worry about her. She won't fight. She's too weak now. She doesn't even have anyone left to turn to." And in that instant, I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood, because he was wrong. I did have someone left, myself. And though tears spilled silently down my cheeks, I sat frozen until the voices subsided and the meeting ended. And when I finally retrieved that phone, my body ached from crouching, but my spirit burned with fire, because in my hands I now held the first undeniable weapon, their own voices betraying them, proof that they had underestimated me, proof that the game had only just begun. And as Caroline and I listened to the playback that night, she gripped my hand and whispered, "Maggie, this is it. This is how we take them down." And for the first time since being shoved away from my own front door, I let myself smile, a thin, trembling smile, but real nonetheless, because I knew the tide was beginning to turn. The next week felt like walking a tightrope above fire, every step calculated, every breath measured, because while Caroline and I quietly passed the recording to her contact in the state's Financial Crimes Division, who nearly jumped out of his chair when he heard David's voice talking about rezoning and leverage, we also had to keep up the performance of me being broken, silent, irrelevant, and that meant ignoring David's constant messages, little daggers that cut with every buzz of my phone. "Mom, I need those account details." "Mom, where are you? You shouldn't be alone." "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be." Each one a twisted parody of concern that reminded me more of a predator keeping tabs on its prey than of a son reaching for his mother. And though part of me still ached to reply, to ask him why, to beg for some trace of the boy who used to climb into my lap and whisper that he would take care of me when I was old, I forced myself to stay silent. Because silence was my shield, silence was my weapon. Meanwhile, the investigators were uncovering layers I hadn't even imagined. The LLC Robert Turner used had ties to a shell company in Nevada, another in Delaware, money funneled through accounts in Clara's name, and worst of all, digital. Forensics confirmed that my hospital records had been accessed illegally during my surgery, meaning someone on the inside had been feeding them information, stretching my recovery with subtle medication adjustments that nearly killed me. And when I heard that, I felt the room spin, because the betrayal wasn't just emotional or financial, it was physical. They had gambled with my life to buy themselves time. And though there was no evidence yet that David had known about that, the very possibility made my chest tighten with a grief so sharp I thought I'd choke. But the authorities weren't ready to strike yet. They wanted more. They wanted me to help. And when Caroline told me this, her lawyer's mask slipping with hesitation, I nearly laughed. A hollow sound. So after giving them everything, my house, my money, my son, now I have to give the FBI a performance too. But then I nodded, because if that's what it took, I would do it. I would bait them into showing their hands completely. The plan was simple but terrifying. I would meet David face to face, pretending to be the weak, confused mother they thought they had broken, while wearing a recorder hidden in the lining of my sweater. And the very thought of it made my hands sweat, because I didn't know if I was strong enough to look him in the eyes and keep up the act without collapsing. We arranged it at a quiet diner off the highway, one of those places with faded booths and the smell of burnt coffee soaked into the walls. And when I walked in, leaning on my cane more than I needed to, David was already there, looking sharp, in his pressed suit, hair combed, tie knotted perfectly. And my heart clenched because on the surface, he looked like any respectable young man meeting his mother for lunch. But I knew the truth. I knew the rot beneath the polish. He stood and kissed my cheek, all fake tenderness, and said, "Mom, you look tired. Are you sure you're okay?" And I forced a shaky smile. "I'm trying, David, but it's been so hard." And he nodded gravely like some benevolent caretaker. And then his eyes hardened, his voice low. "You really should just give us the rest of your account info. It'll be easier for everyone. Clara and I can handle everything. You don't need to stress yourself." And hearing him say it so casually, as if he were asking me to pass the salt, nearly broke me. But I stayed in character, stammering, I don't know. It feels wrong. It feels like too much. And he leaned across the table, his hand covering mine, squeezing tight enough to hurt, whispering, Mom, don't be difficult. You signed it all to me already. This is just a formality. And my breath caught because his touch, once a comfort, now felt like a shackle. I mumbled something about needing more time, about trusting him but being scared. And as he sighed, frustrated, I prayed the tiny microphone was picking up every word, every sigh, every drop of coercion dripping from his tone. When he left, kissing, my cheek again with that hollow gesture, I stumbled out to the car where Caroline and the agents waited. And as soon as the door shut, I collapsed into sobs, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. That was my son. That was my baby. How could he talk to me like that? And Caroline held me as the agent played back the tape. David's words clear as day. Proof of intent, proof of manipulation, proof that my betrayal wasn't just imagined. It was real, documented, undeniable. And though the tears didn't stop, though the pain didn't lessen, somewhere deep inside a spark caught fire, because now I knew we had enough to corner them, to strip away every mask. And I whispered through clenched teeth, let them think they've won. Let them think I'm broken, because when the hammer falls, it will fall harder than they ever dreamed. The call came just before dawn, jolting me from a restless sleep in that cramped apartment where the walls still smelled faintly of bleach and old cigarettes, Caroline's phone buzzing on the nightstand until she snatched it up with a sharp, yes? And I sat up, clutching my blanket to my chest, my heart hammering because I knew what it meant. The agents were ready, the case had reached the point of no return, and sure enough, Caroline's eyes locked on mine with a mix of relief and steel. Maggie, they're going to move today. They want you with them if you can handle it. And though every nerve in my body screamed to run, to hide, to curl into a ball and pretend none of this had ever happened, I straightened my back, gripped my cane, and whispered, if my son is going to see the truth, then I need to be there. Because no matter how much he had hurt me, no matter how much had been stolen, he was still my child. And if this was the day his world came crashing down, I wanted him to see that it was his own choices, not mine, that had brought him to it. By late afternoon, we were parked 2 blocks from my house in an unmarked government SUV, the sky heavy with gray clouds. And I watched as my neighborhood, my beloved street where children used to ride bikes and neighbors traded pies, prepared to become the stage for the most devastating scene of my life. Agents moving like shadows, radios crackling softly, Caroline's hands squeezing mine so tight my knuckles whitened, and then the signal came. A convoy of dark sedans and vans rolling up the street, men and women in FBI jackets fanning out, pounding. On the door I had once painted robin's egg blue with John, their voices booming, "Federal agents, open up!" And within seconds, chaos erupted. Clara's shrill voice screeching from inside, Robert bellowing something about a misunderstanding, Elaine crying like a stage actress. And then the door flung open to reveal David, my son, standing tall and stiff with confusion, plastered across his face as he demanded, "What is this? You can't just barge in here." And in that moment, the agents parted just enough for him to see me across the lawn, sitting in the back of that SUV, my eyes locked on his, and the color drained from his face as realization dawned that I wasn't the helpless woman they thought they had buried. I was the architect of this reckoning. Clara was dragged out first, thrashing, her perfect hair tangled, her earrings glittering in the fading light as she screamed, "This is your fault, you old witch, you ruined everything!" Her venom cutting across the street. But I didn't flinch. I only watched as agents cuffed her wrists and read her rights. Robert and Elaine following soon after, their arrogance melted into shock as boxes of files, laptops, and stolen deeds were hauled out behind them, evidence of every rotten scheme they had run. And then it was David's turn. My son who once begged me to clap the loudest at his school plays, standing pale and trembling as agents closed in, his eyes darting between me and Clara, torn between loyalty and terror. And when they clasped cold steel around his wrists, he didn't fight. He didn't scream. He only whispered hoarsely, "Mom, how could you?" And those 3 words pierced me deeper than every crime combined, because even in the moment of his exposure, he still saw himself as the victim, still twisted the truth in his mind. and though my throat ached with unshed sobs, I forced my voice steady as I stepped out of the SUV, Kane tapping the pavement with every step until I stood just feet from him. My neighborhood gathered around, whispers flying, gasps echoing, and I said quietly but firmly, "No, David. The question is, how could you?" And his face crumpled, a flicker of shame crossing his features before the agents led him toward the van. The weight of years pressed down on me then, memories of lullabies, scraped knees, college acceptance letters, all colliding with the image of him in handcuffs. And though I wanted to collapse into grief, I stood straighter than I had in months, because I had to show him, and myself, that I would not be broken. As the vans pulled away, engines roaring, neighbors craning their necks to watch, Caroline wrapped an arm around my shoulders and whispered, "It's over, Maggie. You did it." But as I stared at the empty porch of my house, the curtains fluttering, like tattered flags of surrender, I knew it wasn't over. Not really, because the legal battles were just beginning, and more painfully, the war inside my own heart was still raging. Could I ever forgive? Could I ever love my son again after? He chose greed over me after he handed my life's work to strangers. The sirens faded, the street grew quiet again, but the silence was not peace. It was the heavy pause before the next storm, and I realized that though the law had taken my son's body, it was up to me to decide what would happen to his soul, and whether a mother's love, battered and betrayed, could survive the ashes of such destruction. In the weeks that followed, I found myself living in a haze that swung wildly between relief and heartbreak. The relief of knowing the Turners could no longer bleed my community dry, no longer sit on my sofa and gloat while my life was dismantled, but the heartbreak of waking up every morning with the same thought: my son is in prison, my boy, the child I once held to my chest, is now a case number in a federal system. And though neighbors dropped off pies, though church friends stopped by with flowers, though Caroline never left my side, I couldn't quiet the echo of David's face the night they took him. Pale and trembling, whispering, "Mom, how could you?" As if I had betrayed him, rather. Then the other way around, and that echo haunted me worse than the empty rooms of my house. The FBI helped me reclaim the property. The fraudulent transfers were frozen, my account slowly restored, and the house was legally returned to my name. But when I walked through its doors for the first time after the raid, cane tapping against the hardwood floors, I almost turned around and fled. Because though it was mine again, it felt contaminated, haunted by the shadows of Clara's perfume, Robert's voice, and most of all, David's indifference. The walls seemed to whisper their schemes, the air thick with the memory of betrayal. And I sank into my late husband John's armchair, clutching one of his old sweaters, wondering how I had come to this. An old woman, 71 years old, who had survived surgeries and grief and poverty, undone not by illness or strangers, but by the very son she had poured her soul into raising. Caroline urged me to rest, to take strength from the victory, to focus on the community that had rallied to me. But at night, lying awake, I kept asking myself questions that had no answers. Was David always this way? Did I miss the signs? Could I have stopped him? Or was it me who raised him wrong, me who planted the seeds of greed and entitlement by giving too much, forgiving too easily, protecting when I should have demanded responsibility? And every time, the silence of the dark pressed down heavier than the covers, because no matter how I turned it, I couldn't find a version of the story where my son wasn't guilty. Then came the day of his hearing, and I forced myself to attend, dressed in black, sitting in the second row behind the prosecutors, while David shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his head bowed, his once proud shoulders slumped, and when he finally lifted his eyes, they found mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something raw and human there. Fear, shame, maybe even love. But then it was gone, replaced by the hollow mask of a man who had chosen his path and was too far down it to turn back. The judge read out the charges: fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, words that tasted like ash in my mouth. And when David's lawyer announced his guilty plea in exchange for reduced time, my chest constricted. Because it was real now, my son would serve years behind bars. And though Clara and her parents received even longer sentences, their empire dismantled, their reputations destroyed. It was David's fate that gutted me, because theirs didn't matter to me. His did, always would. After court, Caroline drove me home in silence, her hand warm on mine. And when we pulled into my driveway, the roses John and I had planted decades ago were blooming again, defiant bursts of red and pink against the weathered fence. And I thought, maybe that was a lesson. Things can be cut down, trampled, stolen, but given time and care, they can bloom again. Not the same as before, but still beautiful. That night, sitting on my porch with the cicadas buzzing, I turned on the camera to speak my truth to the world, my voice trembling but steady enough. I gave everything to my son, and he gave me back betrayal. I was thrown out of my own house, stripped of my money, nearly erased from my community, and yet I stand here tonight with more strength than I thought I had. Because betrayal does not have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of your fight, and if you're watching this, if you've ever been hurt by someone you trusted most, know this. You are stronger than you think. You can rise again. You can rebuild. And as the tears slid down my cheeks, I ended with the words that had lived in my chest since that awful day at my doorway. What my son doesn't understand is that losing me is a punishment worse than prison. Because I will go on. I will thrive. I will bloom again like these roses. But he will have to live every day with the knowledge that he traded his mother for greed, and that is a sentence no judge can lift. And I clicked off the recording, knowing the story wasn't truly finished, because forgiveness was a road I hadn't yet chosen to walk. But as the night wrapped around me and the garden swayed in the summer breeze, I felt something like peace stirring, fragile but real. And I knew my journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about showing the world that even in the ashes of betrayal, there can still be strength, there can still be justice, and there can still be hope.